Okay, here we go. All right. So this is titled Megillat Esther as understood by its first readers, which is another way of saying in his historical context. Because let's face it, there are aspects of the Megillah which we're going to have trouble understanding because there are so many years between Mordechai and Esther and 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 us. You know, like just imagine someone watching. Um, you'll forgive the reference, Lahavdil. But Saturday Night Live, right? Let's just imagine, your great, 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 great grandchildren are going to watch a Saturday Night Live episode. Now, something which might have cracked us up entirely, it's going to be hard for them to understand because they don't know what was in the newspapers this week, right? So, you know, let's just there's an Israeli version of this called Eretz Ne'ederet, um, and so they had a whole skit about how the BBC was really more anti-Semitic than Yichud Sinwar, right? Which is very funny to us because we were very aware of how the BBC covers news in Israel. So with that perspective, we laugh at that because it's very funny. But you can imagine how in 1,000 years people will not have a sensitivity to some of those things. So what we're going to try and do is really going to try and sort of try at least unpack a little bit of what this book might have meant to its earliest readers. And the first question we're going to ask on this is, who was Achashverosh? Um, that's an important question for us. Um, um, so the 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 this is going to get us into deep theological waters. There is a book which is called the Jewish History and Conflict, and it deals with there's a very significant problem with specifically Jewish historiography when it comes to the Megillah. The Jewish chronology is very often defined by a rabbinic work which is called the Seder Olam Rabbah. Seder Olam Rabbah is a rabbinic work that sort of tells us what various calendars are, tells us it helps us give us the chronology of the world. When we say at a wedding, or we say on Rosh Hashanah, this is year 5785. So that comes from the Seder Olam Rabbah. One of the things that the Seder Olam Rabbah seems to be in conflict with contemporary historical sources is that the Seder Olam Rabbah seems not to have a full picture, or at least not report the full picture of what we think are the Persian kings. And so between, let's say, the year um, 368 and 317, we have four Persian kings, and in the sort of other chronologies, there seem to be 10. And so what I'm telling you was something which was first discussed by an Italian rabbi in I think, the 17th century, Rabbi Azaria de Rossi, and um, and Rabbi Azaria de Rossi basically proposed that we use the chronology, a different chronology. And based on Azaria de Rossi and many other rabbis to this day, although I should note this is an issue of significant controversy, but they identify Achashverosh with Xerxes the First. And so if you do that, we're going to look at a couple of different pieces of evidence why we think Achashverosh is Xerxes the First. So first and foremost is the fact that um, the the Hebrew, or the equivalent of in the Persian documents of Xerxes, would be Chashirash, right? So that's how Xerxes would be written. And in the very last line of the Megillah, not, I shouldn't say the very last chapter of the Megillah, it's an interesting chapter. We don't have time to discuss why. Um, the chapter ends by telling us that Achashverosh levied taxes. It says, "Vayasem hamelech ach." It's pronounced Achashverosh. It's pronounced Achashverosh, but you can see, if you understand the Hebrew letters, now this um, Xerxes, which is really the Greek version of Achashrash or Achashrish, right? Which my ancient Persian is poor, so I can't really tell you how to pronounce it, but I can tell you that many of the scholars see that this is the same word, and so that's number one. Number two is that Herodotus tells us that Xerxes was possessed by both lust and a love of drink. And if you have read your Megillah carefully, you will know that that certainly is confluent with and consistent with our Achashverosh. Um, there are more proofs than this. I'm just sort of giving you the headline ones. And in the document, in the very documents contemporary um, with uh, um, uh, um, with Xerxes is a senior official in his government whose name was Marduk. Now, this may not be a slam dunk piece because Marduk was a god, a name of a god, and so there could have been other Marduks, but the idea that there was a prominent individual named Marduk who was part of the government of Xerxes certainly is consistent with the Megillah story. Now, this is not just, in my mind, a very interesting academic um, concept, and we'll see why. Um, now, um, again, there is one last proof that we should bring you, and this is something which comes from the book of Daniel. And just to make a long story short, this particular chronology in the book of Daniel gives us a chronology which is consistent with Xerxes being Achashverosh. Now, this slide is extremely important to us. And what I've tried to do is I tried to lay out for you the the timeline from Hatzat Koresh, the declaration of Cyrus the Great, and taking us all the way through more or less the Persian dynasty. In orange are going to be the significant Jewish dates. And we're going to look at this in a little bit of detail. Now, if you hopefully you recall that the Jews are displaced from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. Babylonian king destroys the first temple, does so on Tisha B'Av. That and the he is succeeded by Cyrus. Right, the Persians take over for the Babylonians, and in the year 538, Koresh makes a declaration that the Jews can return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. And so in 537, the Jews go back and they lay the foundation of the second temple. And there are some sort of bumps in the road, one of which could be relevant to the Purim story, but one of the bumps in the road is that there is an accusation against the Jews that has to go all the way back to Persia, that they had to stop, they had to terminate the building of the Beit HaMikdash because they were being accused by the Samaritans. That particular accusation gets resolved, and they begin to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And here is the dedication of the Second Temple at 515. Ezra's return to Zion is at 458, right? So we are used to thinking of the Megillah as a book that takes place in the absence of a Beit HaMikdash. At least I was, right? I always thought, okay, Nebuch, the Jews of Shushan, they have nowhere else to go. They have to live in Shushan. Why do we say, Yeshno am echad mefuzar mefurad ben ha'amim, that there is this nation that is scattered amongst all your nations. V'datehem einan osim, and they don't follow the rules of your nation, Achashverosh. That is Haman's accusation. You always think, well, what do you want from us? We got kicked out of our country. We got nowhere else to go, right? So we can't go back to Israel. So there is no Israel to go to. If you make the identification that Achashverosh is really Xerxes the First, then the Purim story sits right here in the middle. There is a temple being rebuilt as the Purim story is happening. And so you should be asked, there should be a question screaming into my chat, or somebody should be taking themselves off mute and asking me a question.
Why didn't Esther ask for a rebuilding of Beit HaMikdash? Or
Why
Okay,
didn't
that would
they
be
head
one.
home?
That's already a very frum version of the question. How come Esther didn't ask Achashverosh to give more money for the building of the Beit HaMikdash? But how about just a little reference to the fact that we want to go to the Beit HaMikdash? That maybe Esther could have said, well, send a message to the Kohen Gadol to daven for me, right? There's no there's essentially there's an app there is to the best of my knowledge there is one reference to the land of Israel and one reference to Jerusalem. Anybody know?
אשר הוגלה מירושלים, עם הגולה אשר הוגלתה, עם יחוניה מלך
Okay,
יהודה.
I got my ringer here. Good. Itai Kaliski. In the in I think it's the um in the second chapter, we are told. Let me pull it up here. I'm gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna pull up the text. Give me a second. Sometimes I do these a little bit on the fly. So
the Megillat Esther.
yeah. So the good news is that the website Safaria gives me opportunity to to do all of those things. So here we will. I'm priming it up. All right, here we go. Okay. So here we go. Ish Yehudi Ayash B'Shushan Bira. There was a Jewish man in Shushan Habira. Ushmo Mordechai, and his name is Mordechai. And it tells me that he was the son of Yair and Kish, and he's Ishimini. He's a Benjaminite. Asher Hagla Yerushalayim, who was exiled from Jerusalem. Im Hagola Sher Haglata Im Yechonya Melech Yehuda, with Yechonya, that's Yehoyakim, the king of Yehuda, right? Which was carried out by the king of Babylon. Okay, that's our one reference to Jerusalem. But we have no other reference. The only reference really is the destruction of Jerusalem. And so that's going to be a very glaring piece of a very big question within the Megillah itself, right? Where is that sense of of Shivat Zion, right? In a way, it is. Imagine in 1955, or even better, 1970, right? If we wrote the story of a perfect example. Let's say we wrote the story of Sandy Koufax, right? Let's say, I mean, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but just let's imagine that for some reason we thought the fact that Sandy Koufax not playing baseball on Yom Kippur was the quintessential Jewish story that everybody needed to remember, right? And we got some crazy idea in our head. Well, what year was it that Koufax didn't pitch?
We're Canadian. We don't know anything about baseball.
That's not true.
It is true. I only
You're
accept
Israeli Canadian, and I guarantee you there are baseball fans. That
I don't see anyone jumping around.
The Montreal Expos and the Toronto Blue Jays make baseball as Canadian as anything, right?
I Googled it. It
Oh,
sounds like
man.
it's 1965.
Google it.
Perfect.
Good for you, Shelley.
1965.
Yeah.
1965, right? So we're telling a story about the Jewish people in 1965, and we only talk about Sandy Koufax and Yom Kippur, and we don't talk about the fact that there's a state of Israel, and we've missed something, right? So that's a little bit what's happening with the Megillah, is that it is missing some part of that.
Well, couldn't be reasonable to assume that they were very assimilated, and very small portion came from Bavel to build the Beit HaMikdash with Ezra and Nehemiah?
Uh, 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 It's very possible. All those things. I don't. So I think, Annie, you're on the right path, right? I think you're on the right path. The question just is, where are we going with that path, right? What is that coming to? What is that coming to say to us, and how do the rabbis come to understand this? So um, I'm just trying to figure out why my slides are loading so poorly.
Rabbi,
But yes,
the truth of the matter is that, like the sages hinted in the Yerushalmi, that Eretz Israel was not it was Chareva. It was devastated.
Destroyed. Destroyed.
And
okay,
sorry, yeah. So,
Des-
and the people, it was before the story of the Megillah, according to this um to this timeline, was before Ezra, the writer, the writer, made
okay.
his aliyah. So they're actually the first Jews to the number of the Jews that
Went back.
went into Eretz Israel after Cyrus' declaration stand of 42,000. That's it.
Yeah, very small.
Okay,
Very
okay. All of these things are true. All of these things are true. So what Itai is saying is
Mhm.
that the just like in the modern revival of the state of Israel, the revival of Israel under Cyrus the Great had an anemic response. Most of the Jews stayed in Babylon. If you had a good job and you had a good living, you weren't necessarily running to Israel.
And we have
And
more
that is
hints.
true, by the way, and that is true. We could talk.
Same of Egypt.
Books have been written about how immigration policy, that the biggest favor that the United States ever did Israel was when they stopped taking Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, because that's how Israel got its population.
You mean during the Shoah even?
Before,
Before.
Yeah,
before the
before.
Shoah, and I think Yitzchak Shamir went to um, George Bush the first and said, "You should not give refugee status to Russian Jews because they can go to the state of Israel." And he
Uh-huh.
said, "Taka, you're right." And
Yes.
that's how a million Russian Jews made it to Israel.
Mhm.
Yafeh. Okay.
Also, a small portion of Egypt Jews went back to Israel as well. No,
Well, that may be true. I have no direct knowledge of the options of Egyptian Jews being able
I
to.
was there, but I don't remember.
Well, but here's the point, Sam. Here's the point. Here's the point we're making. And this is a relevant point. We're not off course for the class. Is that Jews don't always make the choice to go back to Israel
Mhm.
for religious reasons. And we're going to get this is still part of the story. So let's get to the middle of this story for just a moment.
Rabbi, can I
Yes.
just, is this in a way the lesson between being in the Gola as opposed to the Geula?
Okay. Hold that thought if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Because you're not off base. I just need I need a little runway to get this plane to take off.
Off base is also baseball. Okay.
No, runways are airplanes.
No, no, off base.
Oh, okay.
לא חשוב, לא חשוב.
Okay. It happened in the days of Achashverosh, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Nubia. Okay, I don't know whether Nubia, I would have said Ethiopia, but fine. This is not my translation. In those days, when King Achashverosh occupied the royal throne in the fortress of Shushan, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers in the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces in his servants. For no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. So, first of all, the first thing you read when you read the Megillah is how long is the party?
6 months.
6 months. Uh, I heard Rabbi Yaakov Medan talk about this. I thought I was the only one who gets a little antsy at weddings. Can we leave yet? Right? 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, right? 6 months? I would go crazy at a party for 6 months.
And drinking for 6 months.
Okay, so the point is that there are a lot of different ways to analyze this particular party, but it seems like it is an exaggeration that there is great party going on. The rabbis are are very distressed at the fact that the Jews participate in this party. Um, and actually, my slide's a little out of order. Um, because at this party, the way that the way that the rabbis understand it, this is from Masechet Megillah. It says, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his majestic Tiferet, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said this teaches that he wore the priestly vestments. Proof for this assertion may be adduced from the fact that the same terms are written with regard to the priestly vestments, as it is written here, the riches of his glorious kivod malchuto, uses the word kivod, and the honor of his majestic tiferet. Tiferet is another word which is used in the description of the Beit HaMikdash. And then we understand that the vestments of Aaron are lechavod l'tifaret. So here you have, this is my AI generated. It did a poor job because it seems to not know how to generate the clothes of the Kohen Gadol. But, it's only artificial, the intelligence. But the idea is, here's Achashverosh showing up in the clothes of the Beit HaMikdash. Whether he showed up in the clothes of the Beit HaMikdash is maybe not so as relevant to us as what are the rabbis trying to tell us about the fact that he showed up in the clothes of the Beit HaMikdash. It basically is a way of editorializing the Megillah and saying, wait a minute, where was the anchor? Where was the temple of the Jewish people? Right? The temple of the Jewish people was Achashverosh's party. Right? Where is the don't miss event for the Jews? The don't miss event for the Jews was the Achashverosh party. That's where you have to go. And so there is there's sort of a cultural diversion of the Jewish people. If we make the assumption, again, that there was a temple in Jerusalem and there was an attempt to reboot the Jewish nation, and the Jews all went to the Achashverosh party, then this may be a very challenging thing. I point out, as I often do, the first Zionist Congress took place where?
Basel, Switzerland.
Basel, Switzerland, right? And the first Zionist Congress took place in Basel because the German rabbis were all against it. And the reason the German rabbis were all against it is because Germans needed to be very patriotic. And so they couldn't believe in the return of a Jewish nation because that would conflict with their German patriotism. So the idea that we are rebuilding a temple for Achashverosh, or the center of the Jewish people for Achashverosh, is perhaps what the rabbis are getting at here. And so here's just another example of the same. Rabbi Levi said this entire verse. So the verse is the beginning of the Megillah. We're told about the various different ministers of Achashverosh, and those ministers have like sort of funny. They have funny names, and so it's the one of the ministers' names is Karshana, right, and Shetar. So the Rabbi Levi is interpreting why do they have these funny names, and he says each name alludes to an aspect of the sacrificial service that was unique to the Jewish people, which the ministering angels mentioned as merit for the Jewish people. Karshana, ministering angel, said, before the Holy One, blessed be He. Master of the universe, did the Gentiles offer before you the lambs, the Karim, of the first year? Shana, right? So it's Karim and Shana put together. And the Jewish people have offered before you. And it goes through all of the different names of these ministers, each one corresponding to a different sacrifice. Now, again, what is this Midrash getting at? The Midrash is getting at is where's your temple? I'll give you, maybe this is not an exact quote, but it's close enough for that to be so.
I don't see the names that you mentioned, Karshana. I know those in the first chapter of the Megillah.
Wait, hold on. Let me get to my point, and then you'll.
Oh,
You'll People say to me, Rabbi, I don't go to shul. My shul is the top of Whistler Mountain, right? Because that's where I find spirituality. And I believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu built a gorgeous world, and in the Tilim there's this concept of Ma'arabu Ma'asecha, right? But the idea that where you're going to put your Jewish future, right? That's a problem because people who daven at Whistler Mountain do not create a Jewish future and are not aligned with the future of the Jewish people. Similarly, people who are at Achashverosh's party, right? Yes, Annie, what was your point?
Well, I can't find this name Karshana and the other names that you mentioned in the first
Okay,
chapter.
so
There, I see the Sarisim, the funny names of the Sarisim, but I
okay.
can't see.
All right, here we go. Let me.
והקרוב אליו קרשנה ממוכן וכולי.
איפה זה? בהתחלה, בפרק ראשון?
Yes, yes. It's in the first
ממש
paragraph.
בהתחלה.
I will pull it up for us.
כן, מצאתי, תודה רבה. סליחה.
Okay, just for the sake of the bewildered public, give me a second.
This is even a stronger evidence of the assimilation of the Jews of Paras. Not to mention the names, Esther from Ashtoret and Mordechai from Marduk.
Well, let's go even better. Okay, the assimilation of the Jews was so powerful that Esther was able to hide her Jewishness. Right
Yeah.
now, think in the shul of the person you know who looks most blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Right, whoever that individual is, the person who looks most averagely Canadian. Right. Would we be able to pass them off completely as not Jewish? Would we be able to keep the secret long enough? Right? These are not things that were easy to do. So anyway, this is the verse, Vakarov elav karshana shetar admata tarshish merish marsana memuchan. His closest advisors were Karshana shetar admata tarshish merish marsana memuchan. The rabbis have lots of fun identifying all of them. They say memuchan is Haman because he's always preparing some kind of evil plot. Anyway, I digress. Just wanted you to be able to see this is where the verse is. But again, the point we're making is the way the rabbis understand this verse is that this party, the center of society, this 180-day adventure, was a diversion from where the center of the Jewish people are. It replaced the temple, right? And I could bring many more proofs. The Talmud will also say when it says v'kelim mikelim shonim and vessels of various kinds that means temple vessels that were brought out.
That does not bode well with the Jewish community of Paras if the palace and the mishter was the essence of their Judaism.
Yes, and here we go. And it does not bode well for them. Perfectly put. Excellent transition. Here we go. The students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him, for what reason were the enemies of the Jewish people, right? A euphemism for Haman, etc., in that generation deserving annihilation? And Rabbi Shimon said to them that because they partook of the feast of that wicked one, Achashverosh, right? Now, some people want to interpret that. That means they ate tray foods. But let's leave the tray foods aside for a second. The idea is that they could have been going to Israel, and here they are at the center of a completely different party, right? That they're in a very different place. Now, I want you to also understand something interesting about the Megillah. The Megillah has a very funny chronology to it, which is that it starts in the third year of Achashverosh's reign. Actually, so let's go back to the third year of Achashverosh's reign. So if we assume the Achashverosh is in 486, so the third year of his reign is somewhere around 483 or so, right? And then during this reign, he gets rid of Vashti. So it's in the seventh year of his reign that he does this whole beauty pageant. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. the reign of Achashverosh, the third year, right, is the big party. That's 180 days. In the sixth year of his reign are these two battles, the Battle of Thermopylae and Salamis. The 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 Talmud is not unaware of these battles. The Talmud is sort of assumes that Mordechai and Haman both had significant roles to play in those battles, and that Haman needed resources from Mordechai in those battles. That really Haman had run out of provisions, and it was only Mordechai who saved him. Um,
Really? Wow.
yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. But Rav Yaakov Midan points out, and I thought it was a brilliant, brilliant um, understanding, is these battles of Salamis and Thermopylae, they are battles where the Persians have overwhelming odds, and a small number of Spartans or Athenians are able to overcome them. Salamis is a land battle. Sorry, Thermopylae is a land battle, and in the land battle, the Persians lose a lot of soldiers, but they ultimately prevail. But Salamis is a sea battle, and a third of the Persian fleet sinks, and they have full retreat. And so here you have this devastating defeat at the hands of the Persians. But in the Megillah, the way the Megillah is narrated is what happens in that time period in the Megillah. You have this fantastic narrative of what happens after Vashti is gone. I'm going to do this in English. I mean, the Hebrew is a very interesting Hebrew. But I just want to read through the English so that people have an understanding of what was really going on at this time. The king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress of Shushan, in the harem under the supervision of Hege, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women. Let them be provided with their cosmetics, and let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti." The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it. In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai, and this middle part here is about who Mordechai was, and he then tells us that he was the foster father to Hadassah, who was also known as Esther, right? For she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted his own. And now we go back to what the king does. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress under the supervision of Hege, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Hege, the guardian of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor. He hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and her rations, as well with the 7 maids who were due her from the king's palace, and treated her with special kindness in the harem. So we have this whole discussion about what's happening in the harem, but what's even more amazing, and what's more amazing is I didn't even put the right verse, because you get even more detail about what happens during this preparation to go see the king. I'm going to switch my share so you can actually see the verses. Here we go. So,
I assume Esther had
okay,
no.
yeah, here we go. Okay, now here we're picking up with the same verses. It says, "Lo higida Esther et bet Mordechai." Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordechai had told her not to reveal it. And every single day, Mordechai would walk about in front of the court, the harem, to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her. Now, this is the important verse. When each girl's turn came to King Ahasuerus at the end of 12 months, the 12 months treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them. 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. Right? I guess Ahasuerus had a very sensitive nose. So he decided that every woman had to, or maybe this was just the Persian harem practice. You spent 6 months soaking in oil, right? And various perfumes and all sorts of weird things, right? And then, right, and the girl would go to the king, and whatever else she needed, if she said, "Give me a little Botox here, I need a little filler there, a little collagen," whatever it was, that's what they would give her, right? And she would go in the morning, she would go in the evening, I guess to the palace, and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the concubines. So Hege was the master beautician, I guess, and Shashgaz is the guy you went to after the king saw you and decided, you know what? This one is too dark skinned for me. This one is too light skinned for me. This one has eyes that are too big. This one has lips that are too big. Whatever it was, I can't say I can speak to Achashverosh's um, sensitivities, but the point is that obviously there were lots of women who were rejected. And after they were rejected, they'd go to Sheshgaz, and she would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her when she would be summoned by name. There was this repository. Uh, Someone might call it even a prison, where all of the concubines, the harem, there was nowhere to go after that, right? And then we learn about how Esther goes and she didn't need any extra makeup and she was fine and she was chosen. But Raka Meidan points out, and this I think is a brilliant insight into the Megillah. The story of what's happening here is you're in the middle of these tremendous battles, right? Where the king and his harem are you get on the one hand you have the king and his harem, and the other hand you have the destruction of his army, and they're two different worlds. But you don't you don't have a we don't have a clue that any of this is happening. It is also possible that a lot of this stuff is just distraction for what is happening in the background. But the Megillah is taking you to a strange place. Now, this could be part and parcel of the message of the Megillah, because as it is well known, right, the Megillat Esther is the book of Tanakh which is missing one thing, right?
God.
It's missing God's name, right? Um, and so you don't see God anywhere in the story, or at least um, in English, the king is never capitalized, right? Um, as in the divine king, the king of kings, right? You're always left trying to understand, is it God the king, or is it not?
Can I ask a question? Is it
Please.
because, is there any sense in this story that the whole keeping all these women for the king's pleasure is just not something the Almighty sanctioned?
Shelley, you have now gotten us deep into a whole different subject.
Up and
So Bernard Lewis has an interest. He says that Westerners were scandalized learning about the Sultan's harem, and Easterners were scandalized at the behavior of women in the West. Um, so I I'm no expert in these things, but my suspicion is that if you were reading the story of Achashverosh from Istanbul in 1450, it would not seem at all weird to you. This would just be how it is. I'm just curious if anyone who grew up in the Middle East is on our discussion now might have some sense of that. But my sense from a little bit of reading that I've done about harems, this was not completely. What's ridiculous is 6 months in oil, but the idea that you have a whole palace full of women is um, was not unusual. Whether God likes it or not, I can say more specifically with the Jewish kings, right? The one of the Torah's prohibition is lo yarba lo nashim, that a king should not have too many wives. And there was a king who did have too many wives, and he got into big trouble for it.
Shlomo
That's
Melech.
that's Shlomo, correct, correct. That's King Solomon.
Anybody
Um,
who's been to Turkey and Istanbul and been to the palace there of the Ottoman of the Turkey of the Ottoman Empire, would have seen that. Absolutely. There was a harem for the pleasure of the king. Every night a different woman. And it was the
Okay,
same
so
in
right. So
Chinese time.
culturally speaking,
Yeah.
the harem in the Megillah would not suggest is not a surprising element. It is as natural as the horse riders. But what is interesting about the Megillah is that you have this king who seems very powerful, but he's not capable. Oh, I realized I got the wrong share on. I wanted you to see the contrast between the king's harem and obviously each one of these is a Renaissance depiction, but the king's harem and the drowning of the various uh, at the Battle of Salamis. Now, but coming back to the king is bound by the law, right? One of the most shocking moments of the Megillah is Esther basically comes to the king and says, "Okay, save me," and he says, "What can I do? Can't save you. It's already been written." That there is a sense that there is a law which is more powerful than the king. That anything that gets written down is actually more powerful than the king. Um, and what is also interesting is that Vashti is never actually killed in in the Megillah. It is rather that the law seems to suggest that now Vashti needs to be replaced. But it is almost, the king in a drunken stupor writes it down one night, and now he's bound by what was written. And so we're already getting in the Megillah a sense that there is something more important. But I want to take you now to, I think, the core of the Megillah, and that is in chapter 4. Let me just get there for a second. Also, just Charlene said in the chat, why would Mordecai send Esther when he knew he was going to be? Okay, excellent question. So Charlene's asking the question of why does Mordecai send Esther? So there's a very interesting interpretation that, first of all, it never says Mordecai sends Esther. It only says Vatilakach Esther, and Esther was taken.
Okay.
And so, since it says Esther was taken, and the sense of Vatilakach is that she was taken against her will. And there's even a midrash that says that Mordecai hid her for several years. And one of the interesting interpretations is, well, I'm actually, here, I'll take you to the.
I don't think Esther had a choice, but ilakach, you're dead if you refuse, I think.
Well, no, that is true, correct. Um, but I want to just show you one interesting thing. So here, in this verse right here, I'll just use my annotation. So it says, uh, and uvmot ima v'ima lekacha Mordechai lo levat. So in the taking of his, after the death of her mother and father, Mordechai took her into his house as a daughter, adopted her as a daughter. That's the conventional reading.
Okay.
The Talmud says, Al tikri labat ela labayit, because in Hebrew, the words lamed bet taf, all you have to do is insert a yud, which means that you're reading it chaser, you're reading it's written without the yud, which is entirely possible, and it means he took her for a household. Now, I always thought this was very strange, but then I heard Rabbi David Katz talk about how in Morocco and certain other Middle Eastern countries, they used to officially betroth women when they were 3, 4 years old. And the reason they would do that is because in some of these Muslim countries, Jews were so disadvantaged that someone could just forcibly marry your daughter, and you couldn't win in court. The only thing they respected was actually if there was a bond of marriage. So you show up and you say, "You can't take my daughter as your wife. She's got a ketubah. She's married to, you know, to Yosef, right?" So that was a form of protection. And so his argument is an interesting one, which is that this sentence, and especially if Mordecai actually married her, he attempted to protect her, and maybe he hid her until a certain point, right? This collection went on for several years, like 4 years or so. They are right. They're collecting women in Shushan, and so the picture you have now, I think, is a very different one, right? Is that Esther is forced into this situation. Um, okay, now going to the center of this whole story, and which I think um, sort of brings our picture fully together. Um, so Esther is relatively sheltered in this in the harem. In the harem, they don't get the newspaper, so she doesn't know what's going on in court. She doesn't know that Haman is now asked to kill all of the Jews. And Mordechai ultimately gets word to her, and he realizes that now that there's this decree, he needs help, and um, and so he's going to um, he's going to sort of activate Esther because now it's time to tell who you are, right? We and Esther pushes back and she says, "I can't do that. I might be his favorite wife, and he might call for me every now and again, but it's been 30 days since he called me, and anybody knows if I knock on his door and he doesn't want to see me, it's off with my head." And here, this is the most important verse. Vayomer Mordechai lashiv el Esther. And Mordechai sent back the following message to Esther. Al tedami benafshech limalet beit hamelech mikol haYehudim. Do not imagine that you of all Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. Ki macharesh tacharishi ba'et hazot. If you are quiet at this time, revach v'atzala yamod laYehudim mimakom acher. Rescue and salvation will come to the Jewish people from somewhere else, and you and your father's house will disappear, or will perish. And who knows if it was for this reason you you became queen. The idea here is that the Jewish people have a story. They have a narrative. They have a succession. They will survive, right? And the question really is where are you planting your flag, right? Are you planting your flag in the king's house? Are you going to be part of the king's party? Or are you are you are you going are you throwing your lot in with the rest of the Jews, right? There's this binary here, which is not you have to save us. We have no other choice but you. Esther, your only hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi, your only hope. That's not what this is. It is you can choose to be with the Jews or without the Jews. If you choose to be without the Jews, you're going to disappear. And in a way, Esther is the story of a people in the diaspora. And essentially, the story is if you do not embrace your identity, you're going to be lost. And the Megillah, if what we're saying about the fact that it is in the time of Xerxes and you have this return of to Israel, then it means that there is a silent geographic component. If we say that the Megillah is a story about that which happens in the background, there is a king above the king, that the king is somehow, you know, um, uh, um, defined by law. Well, there's also a king above the law, right? And that's God. And the idea that the way most people write Megillot these days is every column starts with the word Hamelech. And it's meant to be a reference to the fact that, there is a king. The fourth chapter, the sixth chapter is going to start Balaylahu nadadashnat Hamelech, and it's read in the trup of Yamim Noraim, of the high holidays. So you get the sense that Hamelech there refers to God. I'll just show you one other very interesting, cute little piece. So the fifth chapter, Esther is going to invite um, um, the king and Haman to a party. Vatomer Esther, im al hamelach tov, if it is good for the king. Now here, I'm going to highlight these for you so that you, no, I want, this is what I want. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay. I'm going to highlight the letters. Yud, right? Im al hamelach tov, and then it's the name of God, right? I know it's cute. It's I'm not hanging my whole hat on this, right? Who's Im al hamelach tov, right? Who's supposed to come to the party? Hashem, Shem Havaya, the name of God. And this is not the name of God, which is the God of nature. This is the God of intervention. This is the God that passed over the houses of the Jewish people, right? That's the name of God when it's revealed to Moses, right? The four languages of redemption, right? So um, that's sort of a interesting little piece of the Megillah. But ultimately, ultimately, this I would say that that message of the Megillah is that um, you have um, you have to choose. Just like Esther had to choose. You had to choose between um, you have to choose between being silent, keeping your camouflage, and not working towards the rescue of the Jewish people and disappearing, or stepping forward, and then that ensures your survival. So, that's I think there's also a very interesting piece. I'll end with this. There's an interesting comparison between Yosef, Daniel, and Esther. Each of them are orphans. Each one of them is um, is raised in a foster situation, or at least without parents. Each of them has a non-Jewish name and a Jewish name, and each one of them has a test. Daniel's test is to eat only kosher food. Joseph's test is not to be tempted by Mrs. Potiphar. Esther's test is remaining silent. And each one of those has a very um, important place to in the discussion of assimilation, because obviously being seduced is a significant risk in assimilation. Kosher food, I think, also those who keep kosher keep their identity, and those who blend into the background, those who hide their identity, they also are going to disappear. So I think that that's part of this also. And so when we put this story into its context, there's a lot more to say about Achashverosh and taxes and parties of 180 days. There's much to say about this. But I wanted to at least make that presentation about the chronology of who he was.